Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live, which is called What is Professionalism? I am Jason Murray, President, Founder, and Managing Partner here at BIPOC Executive Search. And I want to start off by doing what we always do when we do have a live, and that is present our land acknowledgement. I am here in Toronto, and the City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And I am going to quote some prefacing words that often comes from one of my colleagues, Dr. Shirley Lay, and the prefacing words that she'll say is, I invite you to hear my words, and then she asks you to think about something. And for me today, I want everybody that is hearing my words, particularly actually individuals who are non-Indigenous, to think about how you have benefited from this land, myself included, when we are not the original owners or inhabitants of the land. Thinking about the fact that my parents' decision to immigrate to Canada has informed the life that I now live. And so when I think about that, and when we all think about that, we really should make sure that we are in solidarity with Indigenous communities to making sure that we're showing allyship for all of the matters that we really need to make sure that we're addressing. Diving into our discussion, you're looking at me and you're saying, wow, I don't know if what I'm seeing Jason Murray wearing is what I was expecting to see. I did kind of want to intentionally wear something that would throw people for a loop. So what I have on is a do-rag. A do-rag is something that you will, from time to time, hear about or see individuals of African-American descent and perhaps some other individuals and individuals of color wear. It is not just fashion, it is function as well. It is a way to make sure that one can actually style hair. And there are times where I myself, as an individual who would obviously sport a do-rag, would be conflicted around whether or not I should ever have a do-rag on whenever I am presenting before an audience with a client and so on and so forth. But if it's a part of who I am, then we have to really question whether or not this terminology, professionalism, and the way that it's been defined has actually been doing some harm as opposed to just good. And with that, I want to pull up a definition of professionalism just before I invite my colleagues to join. So with respect to professionalism, professionalism is commonly understood as an individual's adherence to a set of standards, code of conduct, or collection of qualities that characterize accepted practice within a particular area of activity. And this is something that we were able to pull from Queen's University's website. And it's something that is pervasive and not just something that is a Queen's University quote. I do want to be very clear about that. And so now I want to invite my colleagues in to join me for this discussion that we'll have for the next 45 minutes. First off, Helen McConan, please come and join me. Partner at BIPOC Executive Search. I will invite Candice Frederick, another client-facing individual here at BIPOC Executive Search, and Melissa Sumnath, who also rounds out another person on our delivery team. And we are here to have an engaging and I will say probably a little bit of a random conversation because I promise you, we did not spend a lot of time thinking about what it is we are going to talk about. First things first, I just want to start diving in because everyone that is here today, I am certain, wants to hear about this topic. So I just put up a definition, and some of the things that came up in the definition is set of standards, code of conduct. I think I also saw accepted practice. So maybe I'm just going to throw it out to yourself, Candace, who often has to start off some of our meetings as well. So you're used to this, right? What comes up for you when you hear this definition and know what some of has been the case for many people navigating professionalism as quoted?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Jason. When I see that word standards, when I see a phrase like accepted practice, I think immediately my mind goes to whose standards and who's determining what is accepted practice. And, as I've been thinking about this topic, I think what's been also coming up for me is that I feel that sometimes professionalism gets confused with work culture, and it's not the same thing, in my opinion, at all. And so I think that we have to be careful in using that word, and we have to, ask ourselves if, in environments, if we're trying to disrupt, if we're trying to transform, then how much do we want to invest in fitting in? So that's what I would say, just to start off the conversation.
Ooh, I really like the fact that you were saying that it's being confused often with work culture. They are very, very different things in many ways. And when we cause them to be a synonym, then it can actually end up being harmful. Melissa, can I turn it over to you to talk about this definition and how it lands?
So I had a very similar experience to Candace when reading things around the positionality of who's writing it. I also think about things like, you know, assimilation and expectations from my parents of what that expectation was of assimilation. And I also think around when I hear words like standards or code of conduct or accepted practice, this word comes up for me around um, speaking properly.
Mhm.
And that's something that stings actually when I think about that, because whenever that's said, it's said from someone who is trying to uphold certain systems of oppression within the context of work. And so there's a few things I think for me there around, like what Candace was saying, whose standards, who gets to accept it and not accept it,
Mhm.
and therefore who actually gets agency in an organization. Yeah, those are a few things that came up for me.
Wow, thanks so much for reinforcing some of the elements that have come up in the definition and what Candice has said. Helen, I'm actually going to throw something out a little bit different. Um, can you maybe think about, any of, the work or the previous organizations that you've been with, and you don't have to name any organization, of course, but is there anything that showed up for you where you're like, yes, this is a standard that people wanted to see. This is how people wanted you to behave. This is how people want you to act. Like anything that you're like, even if it's like one or two things that you would throw out to say, here are a few things that are kind of the standard in people's mind when they think you're a professional when blank.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the curveball, Jason, because I was ready to jump in on the definition. Um, but there are countless of examples from other organizations, not only that I've been a part of, but things that I've witnessed through colleagues or friends, where it's around how you present yourself, how you walk through the hall, how you dress, and it's a lot of it. It really is a perception of who you are as an individual, and so there's a disconnect in many cases where um, how you present yourself and the work that you do, are they the same? Can they be the same? And so it kind of goes into the question that I wanted to answer about professionalism. So I am going to throw another curveball here.
Ooh, you're not being professional right now, Helen, when I ask you a specific question.
Well, because I have a problem with that particular
For
definition.
sure,
Because,
yeah.
in my opinion, when you think about professionalism with athletes, it's about their discipline, it's their practice, and it's the way that they are on the field. So still, field, court, what have you. And so it's what we do at work, not necessarily how we present ourselves through the work. And let me just really answer your question. So one of the things that comes up to me is around tattoos, for example, and showing tattoos or not showing tattoos. And I was one of those individuals who thought that showing tattoos in a professional environment or corporate environment or an office environment was faux pas. Like it was a no-no. So, but then that would have excluded myself because I have tattoos. So um, why did I do that to myself when I know that having a tattoo on my body has nothing to do with my work ethic, the type of work that I do, the talent that I have. So that's one example that kind of comes top of mind, and really putting that um, um, uh, making sure that I have extra clothing to cover the tattoo when I go into the office and all of those elements. So that's let me answer the question, and that's one of the things that comes up to me.
Well, I love that you still, talked a little bit about how the definition, causes you to react, but then also talking a bit about an example, which I think is a really, really good one. And actually, I'm going to segue using that. So you just said, you thought it was a no-no at some points in your career to not have your tattoo be seen in terms of, the way that you would show up in the workplace. So it informed what you essentially wore to work. Is there anything that anyone, and I'm going to leave this open to see who jumps in first, wants to say about how the set of standards and the code of conduct, the dress code, everything has affected you personally, in terms of how you've shown up in the world, how you have, and you don't have to go into detail, of course, because this is anecdotal and this is your own personal lived reality and experience. But how has professionalism, in terms of the way it's defined and that people's expectations, affected you?
I'd love to jump in there.
Yeah.
Melissa here. Some of the things that come up for me is language. And so saying things, I used to say sandwich, hard G, and got made fun of at work. Or saying a word like axe instead of ask. And so I became hyper aware of how I spoke and how I pronounced words. And so that's something that really had an impact on me, that then became into code switching. And then it was like I was giving up a part of myself as well. So it almost felt like I should feel ashamed for saying things in a certain way because I was brought up in a certain way. And going back to Helen's point around, that doesn't take away from my mind, my ability to do the work, my heart, my wisdom, all of those pieces. That's something where even talking about it, I can feel my stomach tightening, actually. So yeah, those are a few things that came up for me. Thanks so much, Jason.
Yeah, no, thank you. As you're thinking and reflecting on those times where, yes, you would pronounce something in a particular way, and then it would become a moment where people couldn't let it go,
Yep.
and they had to actually make it a moment. Candace?
Yeah, I would say two things kind of come up for me. And thanks for that example around language, Melissa, because that reminded me of something, growing up in a like Caribbean household with lots of patois and different words. Like, like one of the words for avocado that, we say in my family is zabuka. And I would say that word, and people would they would make a face, because I think it's not always what people say, but you see their reaction. They would make a face, or they would start to ask me questions, or they would say, how long have you been here, or which all indicate to me that some that I don't belong in some form or another. So that's one thing that came up for me in terms of like personally. So I learned not to say certain words, right? So I was like, okay, I'll just say avocado. But I personally prefer zabuka. I think that's a beautiful word. And then just in terms of like hair choices. So, I have natural hair. And and I went to an all girls Catholic high school. And for a long time, like, just like in terms of, because I think, this idea of professionalism isn't just like work, but it's in a lot of environments, even schools, right? So where the standard was, if you were a young Black girl, like straight hair, in some form or another. And my hair is not naturally straight. It's never going to be straight. Right. So, like learning to like accept that. And also just like impacting my hair choices. Like, as another coworker shared, just around the choice of like, for many years, I thought about having like dreads. And then, in my family, people would say, well, you're not going to get a job. You're not going to be taken seriously. But the choice of language or how I wear my hair has nothing to do with the skills or how I show up, but there is a judgment, right? And it can mean that there is a cost around whether you get promoted, whether you get seen, whether you get put on certain projects. So, I think I've just like learned to hide pieces of myself in a lot of environments. And I didn't work in corporate settings. I worked in child and youth and community settings, right? So, but those things are still embedded in those places.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, all really good points. And, as you're speaking, Candace, and I'm thinking about the do rag that I'm wearing, and I've mentioned to colleagues before, I may be trying to get from point A to B and need to actually run to my car or get on the TTC or whatever it might be. And I'm thinking that I want to actually have the do rag on for a period of time so that when I get to wherever I'm going, I can take it off and I can say I went through my hair process. I know some people can't believe that, I would have a hair process, but that's actually part of what we need people to understand in terms of cultural sensitivities. Yes, there is still a hair process for me that I do not want to explain to anyone. But feeling like if I am to step out into the world wearing the do rag, what are people going to be thinking about me? Because when people see this and they see a Black person with a do rag, oftentimes people will then start thinking, oh, is this a particular person that I should potentially fear? Right. So it ends up informing, and that goes for dress all around, right? Even as someone who is gay, I remember many years growing up just thinking I probably shouldn't wear X because if people think I'm therefore gay, it might actually mean they're going to treat me in an unbecoming way. There's still more work to do. Yes, the world is a better place for people who are LGBTQ2SIA community. But I'm remembering back in the day where I was constantly fearing, what people would think or say or do, which would inform a different type of look, which would be a bit more, I guess, professional in people's eyes. Helen, do you want to comment on how any of this has affected you in your own career, your own life?
I think the only piece that I would add, because I can definitely relate on the point that Candice raised around hair, and comments, not only that I've heard positive comments when my hair was straight, and I used to straighten my hair to the point of breakage and damage, but also comments that I've shared with colleagues who have similar hair texture than myself, and comparing it to a Brillo pad, and unkept, and these are things that I'm the one who uttered these words, not the other way around. And so that definitely has had an impact in the way that, I build community, I build relationships with my people, my community.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, there are so many examples and stories out there, right? I mean, like we can't even scratch the surface. There's not even enough time to be able to go through the countless stories of how this word professionalism and the definition has affected people, not even just at work, but in life in general. One of our colleagues, Jesse, when we were having some conversations in a meeting, was talking about, whatever you're feeling, oftentimes you just have to push it down, right? So in a place of work, it's unprofessional to speak up if there's something that just for whatever reason just feels wrong. And he also mentioned that many of us have come from the customer service sector when coming up in our careers, where the customer is always right, and you have to act in a very particular way. And perhaps that actually planted the seed for how we continue to think of professionalism in all environments. How does that land for the three of you in terms of what you would want to riff on based on that? We'll start with you this time, Melissa.
Yeah, that hits home for sure. When I think about that comment around pieces of myself I've had to give up because of the contexts that I'm in, it could be the music that I'm playing. I wouldn't previously have played, let's say, soca music at work, or even house music at work. And so that is informed. And I'm someone that loves to listen to music as well. So choices were impacted in that way. I think it's also around so going back to Helen's comment around what professionalism is in an athlete space is different than what professionalism is in an organization or a company, an institution. And so what I find is folks will typically emulate whoever is at the top. And so if the tone at the top is one that's very conservative, very direct, very analytical, folks underneath tend to emulate that. And the problem that I see with that is there's no room for the actual human side of us within the context of work. There was something else that Jesse had talked about in terms of acting a certain way, even though you might be feeling another. And so feeling like that needs to be pushed down and shoved away in honor of composure. And hey, listen, composure is important for sure. Absolutely. And, at what cost is that composure?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Candice, similar to what I asked of Helen, in terms of an example, are you comfortable maybe thinking of maybe an example where in the past you've had to push down, something that was on your mind that you felt was really, really important to share, also that you can be viewed as being professional?
Oh, Jason, where to start?
You can dial a friend if you need some time if we want to gamify this.
Yeah. I mean, maybe before I share that, like I kind of want to react a little bit to what Melissa was saying, and like something that was also just coming to mind, because I feel like some of what we're talking about is also like the impact that that being told we're not professional can have, and the way that not only that we are, and I'm going to use this word, policed in environments, but then how we police ourselves and then how we police others. So I think where my mind goes there is that, I don't belong can quickly become something is wrong with me or I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. And then instead of looking at the systems we're in, we're spending energy on what is happening inside. So I just wanted to say that because that was something that I really, feel. And so I've worked in a lot of frontline spaces, where you have a lot coming at you, at once. And in those spaces, like those spaces are still parts of the world, like the hierarchies that exist, the binaries that exist. And so what I would often see is I would see a lot of immigrant and racialized like families, behavior really get very quickly labeled as someone who is loud or speaks back. And being a part of that system, when I'm on the front line, I'm seeing what is happening, but I didn't always feel that I could speak back and interrupt and say, this is actually wrong. This is actually, racist. This is actually not acceptable. And so I was asked to go along with things, and I went along with things because I also felt that I had to keep my job. So like, I mean, that's one of the things that comes up for me. And then the thing is, even when you're not in that space, you walk away and then you think to yourself, like, what did I do? Why didn't I speak up? Right. And so instead of, again, looking at the system, I'm looking at myself now. So I just wanted to share that.
Ooh, powerful, powerful stuff. And yes, feel free to answer the questions as you wish. And Helen, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to this part of the conversation. Over to you.
I think that there's the element of the hierarchy, which is what Melissa sort of started speaking about, and the emulation of what's at the top is what's coming up for me, where and I'll give you an example of that. My first sort of true corporate role, hearing a superior, a male superior, using profanity in a meeting, in a group meeting at that. It wasn't directed at anyone. It wasn't used in a malicious way. It was used to express frustration. And I sort of sat back and I went, wait a minute, can you do that as a young professional? You question that. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can. And then I had, nope, Helen, you cannot. Look at you. Look at where you sit in the ladder. You just got here. You were not swearing, even though you have an extremely colorful vocabulary due to some of the music that I heard, through learning English as well. You need to learn those words first, and I will always recommend that. But I thought, no, I can't. I just actually can't. So I suppressed that. Do I use it now? Probably. Maybe some of you have heard me use some of those elements, but it isn't in a group setting. And it isn't because I am at the top. It's because of the frustration that I'm expressing and just utilizing the words.
Yeah. Wow, this is such an important conversation. I often, as people know, like to think through what are possible next steps or solutions or things that we need to change or things that we need to do. Let's jump into some of that. So we heard leadership, we heard systems, right? There's a couple of different things that we can really unpack and pick apart. Let's start with leadership. So, what do we have to think about doing, changing with respect to the leadership piece? Are there particular messages that we have to get across in a much stronger, meaningful way to leadership? Because, as Melissa said and Helen reinforced, leadership really does set tone and really can inform culture. So I'm going to leave this open to see who wants to jump in first with anything that comes to mind. And as Candace Frederick often says, it can be a half-baked idea. It doesn't have to be a fully formed thought. So offer something up so it doesn't lose your consciousness and that you get it out into the world.
Yeah, if I may, actually, recently I saw a video by Will Leahy, who is the Senior Director of Learning and Talent over at GoDaddy, and was talking about executive presence. So linked to this particular topic and the fact that back in 2014, there was a survey and a study to essentially define what executive presence is. And so there were a number of CEOs and C-suite individuals that were interviewed. And essentially what came back, it was glaring with bias. It was physical appearance, it was intellect, it was engagement, it was confidence, it was gravitas. So like you can see that is objective to the individual who's in the room and assessing that. And so the invitation in that video was to really look through authenticity, vulnerability, empathy, inclusion, sense of humor. Those are inextricably linked to what leadership should look like today to exemplify what professionalism is. Generations have changed. The way that people think, the way that people want to connect to their work, a product, their families, society as a whole has changed, and there's a huge push through to be who you are in being your genuine self, and that, in my opinion, is what should be, what we should be looking for as executive recruiters when it comes to leadership and some of those skills. I'll pause there.
And thank you for starting us off on this question, Melissa, and then Candace.
Yeah, that video. Thanks so much for sharing that video, Helen, because I agree. I think going back to that humanness piece, I think that's what it's going to take. When I'm thinking about the future of work and I'm thinking about, there has been a fundamental shift, I think, since this pandemic started. And, I hear that piece around genuine and authenticity. And then there's that other piece around agency. So it really is, when I think about sort of thematically what I'm noticing, it's this shift between moving from transactional, because technology can do the transactions, to one that's about engagement and belonging. And when we're thinking about what would be needed for engagement and belonging, then leadership is around walking with your values consistently. Walking with those values. Our colleague Tak talked about this, and the one that came through her voice was kindness. Kindness. And then there's this other theme that came out as well when talking with the team around kindness for others, and then that dual lens around what does kindness look like for myself, right? So going to professionalism and leadership, it's, yes, if we're asking the whole individual to show up at work, for sure, that's also going to mean that there's going to be sometimes that it's triggering or that folks might be upset. But what do you need to do to shake it off? Is it a walk? Do you need to be in community with someone, like Shirley likes to say, right? Do you need to talk it out? What do you need to do so you can continue showing up in that way? So those are a few thoughts that came up for me there.
Again, powerful, powerful words. Candace.
How can I follow what Helen and Melissa already shared? I think thinking about, leaders and leadership, and just going in some of the direction, Melissa, that you started off in. And when I think about leadership as being about, modeling, and think about it as being mentorship, and when I come back to professionalism, I think, and this came up in our team meeting, just this idea that there are all of these unspoken rules, right? And then further to that this, depending on where you are in the hierarchy, the same rules don't apply. So, if you're a leader, you can do the thing. You can say, you can use profane language, or, you can, whatever it may be. And then if somebody else were to do that, there would be a consequence. So I think, for leaders, and I'm going to put on my counseling and psychology hat, like for a second, like, in terms of behavior, if we want to address behavior, then we have to attach consequences, but it has to be the same consequence for everyone. So that's what I would say. Like, if we're really interested in cultures of belonging, if we're saying that we're interested in equity, if we're saying we're interested in inclusion, then it has to be the same consequence for everyone. And I would say also we have to do away with this idea of unspoken rules. So what are the standards in the environment? And say that this is about work culture. Don't say that this is about professionalism. Say that here, this is what it means to show up, and then make that a rule for everyone.
Yes, yes. As Stacey Ann often says, I hope you have your notebook. I hope you have your pen. I hope you're taking notes. These folks are dropping gems. Speaking of psychologist hats, I want to bring in a guest star. Can we please welcome Dr. Shirley Lay in the house? There's no potty unless there's a Dr. Shirley Lay potty. We got to shake it up a little. How are you, Dr. Shirley Lay?
I'm good. I didn't know I was going to come on. Otherwise, I would have put on, my best dress. I was telling Stacey, I should probably brush my hair.
Look, we are challenging what people think professionalism is. We are living life, and we're just trying to get through the day. Shirley, yes, completely impromptu, and thank you for the magic of our backstage team, Stacey Ann, Steph, Erica, and a couple of others that are always helpful on this platform. Shirley, you had mentioned something to us which really stood out for all of us when we were having a little bit of a team meeting where we're just like, we're going into this tomorrow and just curious to hear what people have to say and what comes up. And you were also anecdotal in terms of some things that you've experienced when you were doing some of your work with students. I would love for you, Shirley, just to kind of repeat that for everyone, and then we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program with the trio here.
Yes, that sounds amazing. Thank you for that. So to the audience members, so there were a couple of things that I shared with the team internally. One was some of my experiences in offering counseling support to young people. So those in the higher education setting, I would say those between the ages of 18 to 24 or so. And oftentimes I worked with BIPOC students and also underrepresented students as well, students from the non-binary trans community. One of the most heartbreaking conversations I always have room for are conversations about students going out into the professional world, underrepresented students asking me questions that pertain to their identity as to whether or not it would be professional enough to engage in. So conversations about whether or not I should wear a hijab, whether or not I should have my piercings visible, whether or not they should be more binary, so that it creates a greater sense of comfort for people. It always breaks my heart to hear that. At the same time, these people are letting me know that they're very aware of the hierarchy within our society. Right, we've structured in a way where those who are cisgender, able-bodied, straight, might be practicing Christianity or Catholicism, male identifying, right? Those are folks who don't generally have to think about who they are in this world. they know that this world has been created for them in mind, and so they don't even have to think twice about hairstyles, their dress, their outfits. So I wanted to put that out there because it's important to have those voices represented in this space, and to give an indication to the audience members that you are not alone in terms of thinking about some of these pieces, and your voice needs to be heard. The second piece I will bring, I talked about the model minority myth. A lot of folks from the Asian or East Asian community will have an intimate understanding of this. So the model minority myth is a construct that was developed mainly in the US. And it was how folks in dominant culture had described those from Japanese descent. And this concept was created during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, when a lot of brown and Black folk who were advocating for basic human rights. And so this term was created out of protest against the Civil Rights Movement, and to indicate to the public that there's a certain way of being in this world, which is to put your head down, be a passive participant, and do what you're told. And if you're being asked to do the most menial job, do it without any protest. So for a lot of us, that is internalized Blackness, I would say, internalized oppression that we have adopted to survive in this world. And in order to for us to decenter and deconstruct what professionalism means, I think a lot of us have to look internally to see if those pieces are still prevalent. It's definitely prevalent for me. Come from parents who come from working class backgrounds, and so they did have to do what they were told for decades on end to ensure their survival, and to stay safe, and to ensure the survival of their descendants. So for any folks where this might be part of your ancestral background, or some of the internalized oppression that's been inherited, it is important for us to examine those pieces. Otherwise, we'd be complicit in part of the dominant culture in oppressing folks. So I'll stop there, handing it back over to you, Jason.
Wow, Shirley Lay, thanks so much for joining us today. It's good to see you. So we'll obviously be talking with you more, but we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing space.
For sure. Bye. Very, very powerful words from Shirley as well. Let's talk a little bit more then about the systems, because even when I hear Shirley talking about things, some of the students saying, will it be professional enough if I wear my hijab? Individuals that are thinking about, and this comes back to you, Helen, Shirley didn't mention the tattoos, but covering the tattoos, or thinking about individuals who are non-binary and thinking to themselves, do I have to look more binary in some sort of way in order for people to know how to interact with me? Because what people do is they then go into context setting, right? This is how I'm going to show up when I can put you into a binary. Do we have to be more aggressive with some of what shows up in policies? Like, should there be policies that actually explicitly talk about, that people need to make sure that they don't do X or Y, even getting down to very particular type of examples or scenarios? Maybe I'll start off with you this time, Candace, and kind of work our way backwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going back and forth on this. So there's a part of me that thinks, yes, maybe, we do need to have things in writing so that people can point to specific things. And, so that there is, something that we're all like looking at when we're in space together. But then there's another part of me that thinks that, in this conversation, what we're really talking about, and I feel like deconstructing, are the models that we've been taught to emulate. And so I feel like we need to name what's behind that. Like, otherwise, like, these ghosts will just keep, showing up. And we're talking about, the things that show up in our societies. We're talking about patriarchy, we're talking about whiteness, we're talking about heteronormativity, we're talking about like code switching. And I think that the more that I think about this, like, and I'm drifting away from the policy piece a little bit, but the more that I've thought about that, I think that as our leadership structures change, then we will have new models. So I wonder if that is actually the better investment, because the people we'll be emulating will be different people.
Wow. Okay. Again, as Stacey Ann Buchanan says, where are the pens? So many gems. Okay, so let's go over to yourself, Helen, and then Melissa. Either riff off of what you heard Candace say, speak to anything that's shown up or came up for you when you hear what Shirley had to say, or focus specifically on, do we need to actually do some real serious work with policies in terms of getting even more specific with respect to what we ink in policies?
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to come out. Maybe I'll answer all of it together or not, or maybe one item. But if I think about what the last piece that you've talked about around policy, there are some company policies that are down to you cannot wear flip-flops in the office. So maybe we do need to be very specific about that. Because I think, again, if it's if it's a risk, a safety risk, then of course you don't want to wear flip-flops in the office. However, and so this is where I'm going with this, and this might be a half thought, is around values, understanding your role, why you're in the organization, what are the surroundings like, and it goes into enterprise and operational risk in a sense, but why you are there, to do the work that you're doing, to uplift the people around you, should be integrated into professionalism, in my opinion. So you are there because you want to uplift, you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to, you want to do good work. And to do good work, you want to be ethical. You want to be honest. You want to be transparent. All those skills that we talked about. And at the same time, you want to, and showcasing some of that. So the emulation piece that Candace was talking about, the fact that leadership has changed, well, society as a whole has changed. And so, yes, it is the time to make some changes in policy. And it's about evaluating not only the impact in the organization, not only the impact in the current state of the organization and the current individuals that are there, but also what the future leaders may look like, and where you want the organization to go to in terms of the future of the organization, because there's so many stakeholders, internal, external, government, TikTok, everybody's a stakeholder these days. So I'll just pause there.
Yes, and TikTok is one of the biggest these days. What would TikTok do? Melissa, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for this question, for all of the pieces that Candace and you and Helen have brought up. When I think about policy specifically, I think about, well, of course, the current market that we're in. And so if you're going to have leadership that is punitive, that is command and control, I don't think that's what's going to get you high performers or high potentials in terms of talent. And so then that, there's a flipping, I feel, there, in terms of, if you want me, this is what I'm going to need to see from you. And I'm great, so you're going to want to, right? So I think about hiring policies, actually, for leadership specifically. And what are the things that folks are assessing when bringing in talent? what I found traditionally is it's the checkbox. Person has this credential, person went to school here, person has this many years of experience, check, 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 check. That's the what, but nowhere in there is the how. How does this person show up when things get sticky or tricky? So for me, it's a real revamping, I think, of hiring policies specifically, and then nurturing that in whether it's the employee handbook of this is what we expect. Yes, we put values on our website, and this is how these values are lived in the ecosystem that is us.
Wow, 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 wow. So many great things here. Okay, let's define using synonyms what professionalism should be. Let's just do that right now. So professionalism, when we started, was set of standards. It was code of conduct. It was all of those pieces. And I'm hearing all sorts of words. So one of our colleagues here mentioned that another one of our colleagues, TAC, mentioned the word kindness, right? So let's just throw out some synonyms. I also heard, Helen, you just use the word honest. So honesty, and transparent. So transparency, right? Melissa, you mentioned the word value. So being in your having your values show up, not just in words, but in actions, right? So we're just going to keep throwing out some synonyms, and that's going to be what we want people to leave with in terms of these things should actually be thought of as professionalism, as opposed to set of standards, expectations, fall in line, do as you're told, all of the above. So let's just see who wants to start off with a word and just see how many words we can do in maybe the next 60 seconds.
I'll start.
Yeah.
Flexibility.
Flexibility. What you got next, Melissa or Helen?
Ooh, Candace. Those were the words. But for me, it was that adaptability and that active kindness. Active.
I love it. I love it.
I'm going to throw a very different word, and it's accountability. We need to also be accountable for how we show up. And it goes into the kindness aspect of things.
Okay. 60 seconds is going quick. I'll just say respect. Who else wants to jump in?
Creative expression.
Ooh.
Creative expression. Yep.
I'm going to borrow something from Candace. Collective care.
Yep.
And I'm going to borrow from Jason. Being a good neighbor.
Yes. Yeah, it can be phrases, words. Anyone else?
I wanted to say something around entrepreneurship, but that's another big word. But I think I'm thinking about the direction that we're moving in terms of the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Empathy. Yeah.
Enabler. So someone that's able to enable strengths in themselves and others.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Did we talk about emotional intelligence?
It came up, but we can say it in this context. So emotional intelligence. Yeah. Yeah.
Direct communication.
I love it. And maybe two others, if anyone has anything else.
Sense of humor.
I really love the good mind.
Good mind. Yeah. And maybe I'll just add humility. So we have. What's that?
Can I add one more? I was going to say disruption.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So synonyms for what professionalism can actually look like in a modern or today's world: flexibility. So a leader that has adaptability, a leader that has active kindness in terms of demonstrating that, accountability, respect, creative expression, collective care, being a good neighbor, empathy, enabler, emotional intelligence, direct communication, sense of humor, good mind, humility, disruption. In there's nothing that actually says, you have to actually fall in line, set a standards, right? So it's really using all of those pieces to allow the next individual to be able to show up feeling that it is a space that they belong, that they're safe, and that people actually want them to be who they are. I will also say that it's really, really important for us to not make assumptions about anyone as we are interacting with them. So again, I'm wearing a do-rag. People shouldn't make assumptions. There's a lot more to me than, let's say, the do-rag. I am intentionally, have particular body language because I will share with people I'm okay, but I'm experiencing some health things right now. And this side of my face, which is not actually doing very well. And it's part of, stress in terms of how it's manifesting, not stress in a way where it's like, I can't get through the day, but those things happen. And so even when people are watching, they might be like, well, he doesn't come across as professional because he's not sitting up straight. And he's like, well, there's other things going on, folks. And so we always have to be thinking that deeply. Like, let me think about this individual and not have assumptions. So with that, thank you everyone for joining. We have one special treat for you. We like to do all sorts of fun things. We're experimental, we're creative. We try to get our message out in all sorts of creative ways. And some people might think maybe it's not professional to actually play a song that will send people off. But, Stacey Ann, our wonderful producer here, was like, yeah, it is. And it's a part of what we're trying to disrupt is using Candace's word to show up authentically. And this is us showing up authentically. So Stacey Ann, I'm going to hand it over to you to play the song. And if this is the last time you're seeing the four of us right now, we'll just wave you bye for now. Thanks for joining. Mwah.
It's lovers and lovers and let them love and be lovers and love and lovers and lovers and love that's waiting and waiting is good. It's lovers and lovers and let them love and be lovers and love and lovers and lovers and love that's waiting and waiting is good. Growing up was tough, often felt so small, but the voice inside said to have it all, said to be myself, go with what I felt, focus in on me and my destiny. Stay by my side as I express my pride. One voice, one force, one love, and one battle cry. Just hold my hand. Just hold my hand. Ready to take a stand. Lovers and lovers and let them love and be lovers and love and lovers and lovers and love that's waiting and waiting is good. It's lovers and lovers and let them love and be lovers and love and lovers and lovers and love that's waiting and waiting is good. Growing up was tough, now I'm standing tall, cause the voice inside never let me fall. I stay true to me, this is how we be. I'm the architect of my destiny. Stay by my side as I express my pride. One voice, one force, one love, and one battle cry. Just hold.
Lovers are lovers. Then let them love and be lovers in love. If lovers are lovers in love, that's winning.